Hi everyone. My name is Shani Shah. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Bunny Bunny is essentially a development or developer productivity platform that spins up on-demand, full-stack production-like environments in the cloud. So essentially environments that include all your dependencies, your cloud-native services, your gateways, your database with proper seeding, and of course your microservices. And essentially provides identical environment for dev, staging, testing, pre-production, and production. With me in the audience, with me in the panel is Joel and Sorin. Roxana, unfortunately, got sick. We were both on the panel earlier this week, actually in Tel Aviv. A lot of fun, rooftop, like 7 p.m., see all the high-rise buildings. But I guess she had so much fun and she spoke so much that she lost her voice. And so we wish Roxana well, but we're excited for Sorin to join. So Sorin, maybe you want to take a minute, just introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here. My name is Soren, as Shani already said. I'm I'm currently the VP of engineering here at Bonishell. So this means that everything that's related to product execution is my responsibility. My background is in software engineering, mostly web stuff, and I kind of switched towards leadership sometime 5 years ago.
Awesome.
This is it.
Thank you, Sorin. Joel, happy to have you here. So maybe you want to
Yep.
take a minute and introduce yourself as well.
Absolutely. Yes. My name is Joel Beasley. I'm the host of the Modern CTO podcast. It's the largest leadership and tech podcast in the world. We have been doing it for 5 years, over 500 episodes. Gotten to interview like Sir Tim Berners-Lee, creator of the web, NASA, Microsoft, really cool guests like that. And my background, 17 years as a software engineer, mostly real estate and financial services type technologies. And then decided to start sharing what I knew with whoever would listen. And that's what started the podcast.
Awesome. Perfect. And you also have a book, right?
Yeah, the book's called Modern CTO. And it's specifically focused for people that are switching from developer to CTO, usually in the startup world. It's got a lot of useful information. We're working on a second book that's going to be a combination of everything we've learned from 500 interviews.
Awesome. Great stuff. Cool. So this over the next 50 minutes, we'll talk a lot about kind of what modern development looks like. Definitely more challenging in the past with lots of components and complex architecture and distributed teams and distributed architecture. And so we'll talk a lot about that. We'll talk a lot about developer experience, and how you perfect that and how you release faster and what you measure and those sort of things. We're going to try and leave about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end, so gear up your questions. And then we're recording this session, so if you have to drop in the middle or, if you weren't able to join, then we'll send you a recording after this session. So with that, so maybe let's get started. So the first thing I mentioned was kind of developer experience, and I think I'm looking at LinkedIn and I see a lot of people in companies like Slack and others that bear the title of developer experience. So Joel, what comes in mind when I say developer experience?
So the first thing that comes to mind is, well, it's always going to be about people for me. That's where I focus. But like the leader's ability to put the right people in the right places, and then the developer's level of self-awareness. So the reason why I say that is because like quality, of the experience is subjective. We're talking about developer experience. The quality of that is going to be subjective. So if you're at a company that does things medium well, and you come from a company that does things extremely well, it's a poor developer experience, right? If you come from a company that does things really badly and you go to a medium well, it's a good experience. So I think that there's a lot of pressure on the developer to know who they are and what they want and where they're at. And then there's pressure on the company and the marketplace to understand the environment that they've created and what they're offering as far as, their ability to stay in business, their business, continuity.
Interesting. So subjective. So in what comes in your mind when we talk about developer experience?
So for me, it's also about people, like Joel said. I'm with him on this 100%. It's about the joy of working on a product. It's about the feeling that you have that you're a co-creator in that product, and you sense that you have some sort of ownership, at least on a piece of that product, and it's your mission to deliver it and to care for it, to watch it grow, basically, right? It's about having the appropriate software architecture, the right tools, the right processes, and possibly above all the right culture, the right company culture in which you have empowerment. You're allowed to screw up. You're allowed to learn from your mistakes. But obviously, you should take a calculated risk position, not go wild on everything. So these are like top of mind. What comes to my mind for
Awesome. So
developer experience.
if I summarize kind of what both of you said, then it's the developer experience. Developers like to create, and so it's an optimal developer experience is about providing tools, culture, mentorship, and an environment that essentially allows them to spend majority of their time creating, as opposed to doing overhead activities, I guess. And like Joel said, it's a subjective experience. Your developer experience is something you correlate to experience at prior companies. And so, if at prior companies you didn't have a great culture and you had to do a lot of overhead activities, and you join a company that has less of that, then it's a better developer experience. But again, it's subjective. So awesome, great. Hi, Marcos. Hi, Asir. Welcome. Thanks for joining. So why are we talking about developer experience in the context of modern engineering? Why is it so important, and how does it fit modern engineering? Joel?
I think one of the things that's on everybody's mind right now is talent, obviously, and the experience at the company is directly correlated to your ability to retain and attract people. So I think from a business perspective, that's a super important attribute of the company.
Great. So churn and retaining employees, especially developers. So,
Yeah.
what do you think? Why is developer experience, taking such a front and center, main stage at these days, as opposed to, I don't know, 5 years ago, where developer experience didn't really exist?
I think that companies realized that it truly matters, because I can't stress this enough. Having co-creators within your team is like monumental, right? You don't just have people executing tasks and executing jobs for which they were, I don't know, given some specifications, because from that point on, it's all the way down, right? The maximum impact is what was requested. But when you have people that truly believe in your product, and they see a sense, a purpose there, a mission, right? They become involved in what they do, and they can push well beyond what was requested, right? And then you basically have a collective mind. it's so sad that up until now, so many companies have not taken advantage of this. So they just use the really smart people to execute stuff instead of having them as creators of the product. So the product is also really really important here. What's the product mission? What's the company mission? And this is something that the newer generations count on pretty much when they decide to join or stick with a company on the long run. So basically, having your life account to something and improving things for others is really useful. And as Joel said, the turnover is a true business indicator. And if we look at the turnover in the industry, it's really high. So there's a lot of waste there in ramping up people, then having people not being efficient because they don't like what they do or they don't have the right context. So at an industry level, it really adds up to some phenomenal waste at a year's level, let's say.
Yeah.
Also, from the people side, from the developer side, in order to be able to have this involvement, they need to have the right context. So they need to have the right tooling. Environments as a service is a new trend in this regard. So having the ability to have a complete environment, a full stack environment, which resembles production very much or is identical to production, the ability to code and test your code in a true life scenario is also very important to avoid rework. So it's setting up the context, and many things are aligning towards this, to having a better context for developers, to allow them to focus on what really matters, which is the ultimate product, right? To focus on the outcome, not just on the output. So it's not about writing code and having functional apps. It's about delivering value to the end user, and everybody in the team needs to think about this.
Yeah, you made a couple of good points, so I'll just iterate maybe two of them. I speak a lot to VPs of engineering, engineering leaders, CTOs, and I hear a lot. Two things. First of all, the time that it takes them to hire a developer and ramping up is measured in months. It's a very competitive market, and typically you have an open break for about 2 to 3 months before you find and place someone, and then again it's another month to 2 months until they're fully set up. They understand the product. They're able to write their first significant task feature. And so that's one thing that I hear. And then the second thing is developer wants the autonomy. Give them the tool and the autonomy to get things done their way. So if they need a proper environment to test, or they need a proper environment to develop, or they need a proper environment to reproduce a certain bug, and they have to wait for a DevOps person to set up the Kubernetes and the Terraform and to rewrite some of the scripts, etc., it's not a great experience. If they have to spend a week debugging the local Docker file, or they have to every day install another library or update another library, it's not a great experience. And so I definitely hear that a lot. Joel, maybe a last question about kind of the developer experience. You talk to a lot of engineering leaders at various companies. What's like a company that you think has a phenomenal developer experience, and why?
Yeah, so they break into a couple different categories. But the interesting thing that I enjoyed hearing, because I haven't had a lot of experience with Bunny Shell's engineering team, I just met Soren today, but I have had experience with other executives there, was the way that he describes and talks about his thoughts on engineering and leadership is the top tier of what I consider the best people that come through the show, how they run their teams. There's a spectrum, of course. There are places that you could say, hey, Joel, can you recommend a place where I could potentially get in fist fights over code reviews? Be like, yeah, I know companies that have that culture. And I also know companies that have amazing culture, like, Bunny Shell. And that's why I always put a premium on the individual's ability to have self-awareness on what they want and where they belong, because the right culture is very dependent on who that individual is and what type of environment they're looking for. Me personally, I lean towards the Bunny Shell type of environment.
Thank you, and we'll send a check afterwards. But no, really appreciate that. And by the way, not to discount Soren's leadership, but I met some of the engineering leaders of Bunny Shell 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was in Europe, and just the fact that we were developer to developers was very exciting for a lot of the team members. Again, the problems that they solve, or the problems that Bunny Shell solves, are problems that they experienced in prior companies and were very frustrated with. And I think that's another reason why they're very motivated, and they feel like they're creating something significant. And so, but enough about that. Let's switch gears a little bit and shift from developer experience to talking about software development lifecycle. So, what does how should modern tech leaders in high growth companies think about software development lifecycle? So, maybe we'll start with you this time.
Okay, so in today's world, fast is mandatory, right? So you need to be able to be really responsive. You need to be able to develop fast, prototype fast, release fast, so you can get feedback early on, right? You need to be able to iterate on that feedback and what users say really fast, so you can get the product, the feature, whatever, to do what users actually need, right? Also, you're gonna have some bugs that will slip on there, right? Maybe minor, maybe not so minor, but it's also really important to fix those bugs really quickly in order to deliver a quality experience for users. And I think everybody knows a few pieces of software which has like open bugs for years. It's really annoying, right? The issue is known. Maybe some discussions were held, nothing was done, and so on. So businesses really need this. We're in a really fast-paced world, and obviously no one is happy with the speed that we're currently having. So that's why we need to constantly look at what we can improve and how we can do things better, and constantly raise the bar on what success looks like here. Obviously, in order to do that, you need to measure stuff, but this is not the
We
point
can
of
measure
this.
stuff in a second. It's almost a great segue, but just before we do that, Joel, maybe over to you. I mean, what should leaders in high growth companies think when it comes to software development lifecycle?
Yeah, so I like to go with, I don't give advice. I just go interview smart people and transmit their advice to the audience. So what I observe and what I see people doing, first of all, what Soren said, absolutely. To add to that, I think that understanding behavior change is incredibly important, because when you're thinking about the software development lifecycle, you're inevitably going to modify it. I mean, it changes. We learn new best practices. We grow as an industry. And so when those changes are happening, you're going to have to sell or communicate these changes to your teams. And understanding how behavior change happens and how to do it well is something that I see some great leaders consistently do.
Awesome. Good stuff. So, maybe a follow-up question to you that's kind of more into the weeds, but what are your thoughts of decoupling deployments from release?
Yeah, this is a good one because I bet that for a good chunk of technologists out there, these two are the same. Like having a release is synonym with a deployment, because a release ultimately is a deployment, right? But a release is more like defined not by the code reaching production, but more like the users having access to that code or to that feature. So basically, what you can use here is feature flags or derivatives from this, right? In order to be able to ship fast, but maybe not launch or not launch yet. Maybe business has some other things to correlate first, to orchestrate before a feature needs to be published, let's say, or released to the users. But it can be available in production right away. And this is a mandatory thing for trunk-based development, which is catching quite some ground in the last period. Sorry. So you're able to ship code, but not yet launch it. You can launch it in increments, like launch it internally, and then do, I don't know, rollouts for more active users, or for users who enrolled specifically for beta testing, and so on. And obviously you can roll back if somebody experiences some negative output there. And obviously you can do this automatically. So when having monitoring in place, you can track the error rate and decide, have the system decide automatically to roll back or scale down on something until you get the chance to debug, and so on. So this is a great way to debug production, by the way, using feature flags.
So would you say that the line between deployment and release has significantly blurred with with things like canary testing, feature flags, and things like that? It's sometimes not exactly clear at what point something really gets pushed into production. Plus, it's easy, like you said, to roll back.
I would say that you need to be organized. Definitely need to be organized on this, and to know what you want from this. But I'd say that actually it became more clear with these modern practices. It was like blurry or no line at all in the past, but now we're starting to have much more awareness on these practices, and much more businesses to use them. And although it can be difficult, or more difficult, it can be more time consuming to develop features this way, because if you add a new feature, yeah, it's simple to feature flag it. But if you have like another path for an existing feature, then it's a bit trickier to do this. But it pays out, because overall the quality which the users perceive is much higher than if doing kamikaze deployments uh, in production directly.
Got it. Okay, great insight. Before we continue, I mean, I can ask you guys questions for another 4 hours. It's very rare that we get two smart people on such a great panel. So, but we really want to get your questions. So, for those in the audience, feel free to post your questions. I'm going to try and balance between the questions that we have and what you guys want to hear, but we definitely want to try and make it interactive. So gear up your questions and post them on the chat. um, Joel, Sohail was kind of stealing my thunder a few minutes ago, talking about measuring things. And I think what's great about the era that we're in is there's so much data, and it's so easy to measure everything that you're doing. I mean, again, I come from sales. 5 years ago, it was very difficult to measure sales, but these days you're recording calls, you can measure engagements, you can aggregate different channels, and I assume it's the same thing for engineering teams. So when do you start to measure? What do you measure? I mean, these door metrics, and then maybe I have a few follow-on questions about measuring. But when do you measure, and what do you measure?
Yeah. So to Soren's point earlier, he sort of briefly touched on it about customer value and outcomes. So the trends that I see amongst leaders, engineering leaders, is the ones that tend to do better. They're really clear on the value that what they do brings to the customer, and they have some system to track it. So there are many different metrics. There are many different systems. So I don't necessarily support one specific one. And the reason I don't is because companies are built around the market and what the market needs. And so you'll see people talk about things like 2 pizza teams. It's like, okay, well, hold on a second. First, you start with the customer, and then you sort of build backwards from that. So an agency will look different than a SaaS software company will look different than like an internal team at maybe a corporate finance team, engineering, or something like that. So just when we talk about measurement, I like to take that opportunity to tell people, obviously you need to be measuring and have those measurements somehow connect to outcomes that you're providing for the company, and how those outcomes that you're providing for the company bring value to the customer. And being aware of that already puts you in the top 10%. You walk up to most engineers and you'll ask them, hey, how does what you're doing right now bring value to the customer? And I would say most of the time they don't know.
Yeah.
But the companies that do that well, that reduce that distance between the developer's understanding of what they're working on and how that brings value, those companies tend to do better. And I always talk about the magic paycheck fairy. So often people early in their career, they just imagine there's this magic paycheck fairy that grants them these paychecks on a cycle. And that is not how the economy works. You bring value to somebody in exchange for that value. They give you money. You use that money for the paychecks and to grow the business. So,
Okay, I think Luke likes your comment about the outcome-based world mapping engineering, and I can definitely echo that. I love having the developers join sales calls and kind of listening, because many times they understand better the requirements. They can connect the things that they're working on to the outcome, and feel like they have an impact on the company's business. So definitely love it. So in what do you measure, and again, do you benchmark yourself versus other companies? Is it subjective? Do you measure kind of where you are today versus 6 or 12 months, or what do you measure?
Okay, so I'm gonna speak from an ideal standpoint. Let's say first, not necessarily ideal, but not necessarily about Banishal either. So this is what I would do in the past. I will do in the past, in the future. Sorry, and then I'll bring some context towards what we have currently at Banishal. So obviously, regarding going fast, I mentioned it earlier. I mentioned it that the business needs it. You also mentioned about Dora metrics, and these are some pretty shiny tools recently widely adopted by the market, by the industry, but they're not so recent. So they've been elaborated, I think 7 years ago, something like that. And these measure how frequently teams, or how fast teams can release code into production. So
Mhm.
it's about 4 metrics. It's the lead time for changes, which implies the time since when you start developing until you have it in production. It's also called cycle time by some. There's also the deployment frequency, which obviously encourages you to release faster. Obviously, you'll release smaller if you release faster, but it's not about the throughput. It's about having smaller releases, and this brings a lot of benefits. First of all, it correlates with developer experience also, because big releases are like I don't know, waking up at 3 a.m. Doing a deployment. It's really uncomfortable, right? If something crashes, the stress is really high to put it really fast back up. If you do a rollback, everybody's on a downward moral. So you need to avoid this, right? It's something that it's unpleasant and it definitely needs to be avoided. If you release smaller, then the risk is smaller, and the people will be happier, right? And also, if you release more frequently and release in smaller chunks, you greatly reduce the risk of complications appearing. So a side benefit would be that you'd have more successful releases. And this is another metric from the DORA metrics, the change failure rate, I believe is called. It basically measures the ratio of deployments with no defects, right? Ultimately, it's up to any organization to define what no defects means. Like, did you uncover a bug after a week, after a year, and so on. But um, the point is that even though you have some leeway in how you define this, like for lead time to change as well. Some track it since it entered the backlog. Some track it since the first commit was made. Some track it after the specification phase begins, and so on. But it's important to clearly know what you want from this and be consistent with it. And you can measure it accurately and consistently across time to see evolution. It's not that much about absolute numbers. You asked me if I
Mhm.
benchmark
Yeah.
against other companies. I truly believe that the software development industry is far from being mature. So looking like 10 years behind, it seems like we're over the moon, right? But
Okay.
uh, looking at the pace in which things change, like looking back 1 year, 2 years, right, and 3 years, you can see that's constant growth. So constant growth means that we're not there yet, right? When that growth will start to flatten, then we'll have a sign that we're maturing, and this is really good news for us. So it's really exciting for me to be part of this process in this industry in which we're ever evolving at a really fast pace, right?
Yeah.
So what I was trying to say here is that until we get to a more mature model, it's pretty non-standard. So variations are big from one company to another. It's really important to see what the trends are, how others are doing, but it's not that important in terms of absolute numbers, right? It's important to know what to track, where the trends are going, what you should do, and then compare to your past self. And if you get better, that's a really good sign, right?
Okay. So
Um,
so it's objective, I guess.
yeah, this is the first one. Obviously, you can look at numbers, but it's pretty difficult to get that exact same vertical, same industry, same specificity. Like Joel said, development agency will have wildly different numbers than
Mm.
an internal team at a SaaS, right? Or a support team in another system. Like A SaaS is also very different than an e-commerce, even though they have both internal teams. In SaaS, the product which the user is buying is the platform itself, right? In e-commerce, the product which the user is buying is what's getting delivered to the doorstep, right?
Yeah.
The end product. Obviously, the experience needs to be good, but the interaction with the software is only part of the journey, and you can have the most beautiful shop. If you don't have the right products, then it's all for nothing, right?
Yeah. There's also, I want to add something to that, because a lot of people think when they talk about these measurement systems or ways to like measure developer productivity, that there's some sort of drag and drop solution, and it's not. It's always going to be a deeper thing. So like the idea of going to get an off-the-shelf software, there are many of them. I've interviewed people that create them over the past 5 years, and they'll all have different methodologies, like number of commits or how many like rollbacks or changes there's been. But I've found, like, personally, in my experience as a developer, I didn't find them like incredibly solid across all industries. So
Mhm.
I mean, it's a tough thing, and I think it even reinforces Soren's point that it's immature. It's got a lot of growth to do as far as developer maturity, and I believe once we figure out how to accurately measure developer productivity across all use cases, the AI will already be here. we'll,
Yeah.
we'll already be out of jobs. They'll already be engineering for us. So
Awesome. So in
We'll
two
have to
follow-up
track the
questions.
EA. Sorry, Shani. Please.
So in two follow-up questions, I'm going to actually take one of the questions from the audience that I think correlates to what you spoke about. So measuring is subjective. How do you set the bar for the engineers on your team? How do you measure them? And again, we talked about the fact that measurement is is not easy to do. And then how do you make decisions about coaching and managing your engineer, or even again managing them out?
Okay, so what I like to do here is go backwards, like Joel said, with the business starting from the user, right? I like to go backwards for the engineering team. So what's our outcome? What's our result? We build a product. What's needed for the product, and this also might change over time, right? We here at Bunny Shell are now in a phase in which speed is favored against predictability, let's say, right? So looking at how accurate estimations are is not a priority at the moment, right? Releasing faster is. Uh, who builds the product? The team builds the product, or the teams, right? So I generally look at what the teams behave like, what the teams accomplish in both terms of output and outcome. And only if issues arise, I go towards the individual. Measuring individual performance in such a creative domain is really hard, like truly objective, right? And to also matter. You could track like the number of commits, number of lines lines of code, sorry, written and so on. But obviously, they have no relevance. They don't show how qualitative the product is. So maybe using more qualitative metric here, like NPS, could be a good choice, right? You could have an internal NPS, like from the product department, let's say team. You could have an external NPS. How happy are the users with your product? Because ultimately, if the users are happy, nothing else matters, right? This is the topmost metric that you can measure. Besides that, it's also very healthy to have some KPIs like track the number of bugs, right? Maybe a split based on severity. Um, somehow track the rework rate. There are a bunch of platforms that can help you with this. Generally, rework. I look at rework as stuff that's redone after it's launched. So I take for granted that part of the creational process will mean rework. Like when a developer is writing code, as it's evolving, obviously things will get rearranged, refactored, and so on in order to produce a more qualitative product. But tracking rework is one of the things that you can track. But again, not to measure individual performance, but more to measure like team performance, and not so much as past performance, but future performance, right? So I wouldn't use any of these metrics to play a blame game, like why did we do this or why did we do that. I would look at potential problems, like if we have high rework rate, maybe it's time to put a halt, reanalyze stuff, and see if we need to do some architectural changes or things like that, right? So it's very tricky to track performance, but as I said, having some general KPIs like the number of bugs, which correlates to quality perceived by the user, the rework rate, which correlates with the speed at which you're going. Maybe track on-time delivery, but this is for more mature businesses from my point of view. So in a high-growing startup, it's not something that I would focus on. Avoid context switching. If you are able to track this, this is a very important thing, but it's usually very hard to track of objectively. Like you could use Jira or other software tool, but as we all know,
Yeah,
uh, context switching happens over Slack or behind the scenes, let's say, not on official channels. So if you cannot track something accurately, maybe you should not track it at all.
got it. Okay. I want to go back to one last metric that you mentioned. The previous answer you talked about lead time to deploy. Um, so we talked about measuring that. How do you reduce that? What are some practical ways that you can reduce lead time to deploy or
So
increase deployment frequency alternatively?
yeah, these usually go hand in hand. What you can do here is automate as much as possible, right? Repetitive tasks slow you down, and they're a real mood killer for people. CI/CD is the obvious solution to this, either CI or CI/CD,
Hmm.
which also leads to releasing more often. So if you have everything on autopilot until the point in which you need to decide if this should go or shouldn't go into production, then you have all the prerequisites for doing this. In order to achieve this, obviously, you need to have tests automated as much as possible. You need to have environments on which to run these tests in isolation, so the bottleneck doesn't become the testing environment itself.
Yeah,
And you need to experiment. This is a really important thing. You need to have a mindset for experimentation, and you need to accept that some experiments will not produce the hypothesis results, but
yeah.
in the mid and long term, definitely you will gain from this.
Yeah, I think one other thing you didn't mention or highlight that is you talked at prior answers about WeWork, and I think WeWork is after you debugged something and you figure out what's wrong. But I would say a lot of time I hear developers complaining a lot of time about the effort to debug something and get to the point where you know how to fix that, because again they're using a local Docker and the bug is on a staging environment, because they don't have the proper tools to reproduce the bug, and so So I would say debugging is probably more painful than the rework piece.
But it works on my computer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, since you mentioned this, I recently saw a study which said that 91% of the developers admit that they basically at least once swept under the rug a failing test because they could not reproduce it. So yeah, reproducibility, sorry, is really important to allow quality to increase for products in terms of
Yeah.
environments, I mean.
Yeah. And I know that on August 2nd, we're actually, hopefully by then, Roxana's voice is going to come back, and she and Todd will talk more about kind of the practical ways that you can increase the release time to deploy. But one of the questions from Wavi was when you talk about, so when you talk about tracking rework, do you mean tracking rework in a positive way, meaning improving the code or the systems, or are you talking about that in a negative way, meaning you've done something and now you need to redo that because, again, you developed on a local Docker and now you're pushing that into a staging environment. It looks different and it has different security policies, etc., etc.
Yeah, I'd look at it in a negative way, but I wouldn't call it like that. I'd look at it as an opportunity to learn something about the system. So I'd use it as an opportunity to raise some questions. Why is this happening? Why is this keep still happening within this area? Is this something? Is there something that we didn't get there? Are there any chronicle issues there? So in terms of okay, this doesn't work out so well, let's see what we can do to change the situation.
Yeah. So not in a positive versus negative, but in terms of again, you wrote the code and you need to write it again for various reasons.
Yeah, definitely. Usually, if you keep on rewriting a module, a piece of code, whatever, uh, it means that you can probably do something better there. If it keeps on getting rewritten, maybe you should make it more extensible, or maybe provide, I don't know, some middleware, some points of extension, hooks, whatever, in order to be able to plug in extra functionality without actually rewriting it over and over again.
Yeah, like you could see that in like payment systems that get extracted, right? It's like you would see a bunch of rework if they're just trying to expand the payment system to work in different scenarios as the company grows. And then eventually that payment system will abstract off into its own thing. And so monitoring the rework could show opportunities to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I was referring to in terms of direction and how I would use that.
You don't slap the developers with a ruler. Too much rework.
We have some automated robots that do this.
Oh, you're efficient.
I've
Kidding, no.
personally not seen Sorin chase a developer with a ruler, so
Remote work also helps on this topic.
Yes.
yeah. Palieter, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, was asking about any maturity assessment and development models. We actually have one, and I'm happy to follow up and send it to you. I think it's we're probably not going to have much time to touch about it in this session, but I'll follow up. Also, another question from I guess from Josie. How do you think about diversity and inclusion when it comes to high performance teams? Joel, maybe we'll start with you.
I wouldn't. I don't want to answer that live. Well, I guess I will. So the trend that I've seen, because I'm not going to talk about my personal preferences here, I'll talk about the trends that I've seen across my interviews. The trends that I've seen is over the past 5 years, the conversation has shifted from gender and race, color, all of that to diversity of thought. So that's what I am seeing. They're changing the conversation from skin color and gender to diversity of thought, because that is something that you can, really wrap your mind around. It's like, how, because you can have, here's the thing, you can have a variety of people, a variety of races, and a variety of genders that all think the same way. And so the benefit is not their gender or their color. The benefit is how they think. So by placing the emphasis on diversity of thought, you get better results consistently.
Cool. So, Wayne, anything to add here?
I really feel that I can't add more. It's like spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, perfect. I think this goes beyond engineering and actually probably applies to, every practice and every team, not just the engineering team.
Yep, and I did
Um,
do, because that is a difficult conversation, which I don't like to shy away from. We talk about him on the show. I actually did a really good episode with a guy named Brendan, and he's one of the leaders at Dave Ramsey
mhm,
company, and we did a whole episode on difficult conversations, like how to have these difficult conversations, how to walk through them, and it is by far one of like the top 10 most popular episodes we've ever done, because having difficult conversations is a super hard thing to do well.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Um, I guess, last question, and then we're gonna try and maybe pick one or two final questions from the audience. But what are some of the, we talked about kind of modern software development practices, etc. What are some of the things, as you guys kind of look forward, what are some of the trends, the tools, the platforms, the methods, that you guys are excited about, that you've seen high performing organizations adopt? Joel, maybe we'll start with you. You talked to
Yeah.
quite a bit of engineering leaders.
Yeah, one of the I thought about this earlier when Soren was talking, but one of the more recent interviews I've done where I was pretty impressed was with a guy named Charles, who's the CTO at GoDaddy. Most of
Mhm.
us are familiar with that brand. Their culture over there in engineering with experimentation is quite possibly one of the most interesting I've ever heard about in my interviews. They have a strong experimentation. They've built their own internal systems for experimenting, tracking the results of the experiments across their, various, whether it's sales pages or in engineering or whatnot, to the point where it's just a huge part of their culture. People look forward to putting forward experiments and measuring them. So when you were talking about, frequent deployments, feature flags, experimentation, they're currently one of the more interesting ones that I've seen do that really, really well. And then, of course, reliability is another thing that's a big trend that I see coming up. More and more people are talking about reliability engineering. You see companies coming out like Gremlin, lots of tools and suites and consultants, and a lot of energy coming up around, making products really reliable. And then the last trend that I see, it's my favorite trend. I think it's been going on for about 7 to 10 years, but it gets stronger and stronger, is we are seeing less of the jerk persona. The idea of being rude as an engineer has increasingly become less popular, and teamwork and how to achieve outcomes has become more popular. And for me, when I entered in engineering, if you were the hero, the rude person, the only person that could do it, the single source of whatever, that was like the cool thing to be. And it's not anymore, and I'm very happy about that.
Okay, so Wayne, any thoughts on your end, things that you're excited about?
Yeah. So developer experience is one of those, and the awareness of companies and their commitments towards improving it. It's really important. It's a real game changer in the industry. Uh, Another thing is probably more techish stuff. Observability. So the use of machine learning to create predictions and have better decisions, which ultimately increase software quality, is a thing that I'm really excited about. And it's a thing that it's way better done by machines than by humans, obviously. There are also the classic ones, Kubernetes and serverless. The adoption is rising, the awareness, the knowledge in the industry, and this forces the technical levels for engineers to rise. They're exposed to a bunch of new paradigms and new concepts. So the overall knowledge in the industry will definitely rise. Also automations, CI/CD, I mentioned this, which solves real issues. We've kind of hit some bottlenecks there, but environments as a service is a new trend, which is on the rise and helps solving those. And probably I would mention also security. So DevOps was the hot thing. Now it seems like DevSecOps is the
Yeah.
new hot thing. So security is not a final step of compliance or whatever it was. We're starting to think of security from day one and constantly throughout the whole development lifecycle, which will in turn be much bring much better products for the users.
Yeah, you mentioned Kubernetes. So as I alluded to earlier in this session, 2 days ago we did a panel about transition from monolithic to microservices, containers, and Kubernetes, and kind of when's the right time, etc. So if anyone's interested in that, just follow up with us or register to the newsletter, and I'm sure we're going to send over the next couple of days. We have to wrap up, and so I'm going to try in 30 seconds maybe summarize, a lot of the things we spoke about. So we talked about the concept of outcome-based development. I love that. We talked about developer experience kind of emerging due to the need to retain employees, and the fact that developer experience is it's about tools, it's about culture, it's about essentially letting developers create and removing any bottlenecks around that. We said measurement is subjective, and I love the comment from Joel about diversity of thought, and I think a lot of the audience actually liked it, so I'm gonna pick it up and start using that as well. Really want to thank you guys. This has been amazing, amazing panel, tons of insights, and I think we touch upon a lot of points. And so thanks again. Thank you, Joel. Thanks, Owen, for joining us last minute. And
Is there a call to action for Bunny Shell? How can people learn more about Bunny Shell?
yeah, so two things. One, bunnyshell.com. We have a free trial. You're welcome to sign up or ask your teams to sign up. As I mentioned, on August 2nd, we actually have a webinar that talks about, kind of what are the more practical ways, to reduce your lead time to deploy, increase your deployment velocity and frequency. And so it's going to be a short, 30, 45 minutes discussion. I think we just posted the link below. Feel free to join. I think if you're interested in how high performance teams measure and release and how to reduce lead time to deploy and provide great developer experience, you should definitely tune in for that. And with that, thanks again. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Soren. Thanks everybody for participating, and enjoy the rest of your day. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are.
Thank you
Cheers.
also. Great one.